Good afternoon. Welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Today is the 116th birthday of Mother Teresa, born August 26th, 1910 in Albania. There's something almost providentially annoying about allowing this tiny Albanian nun to speak into our present-day frenetic materialism. Annoying because she introduces uncomfortable narratives. Everything our modern civilization treats as indispensable, she thought was negligible. Everything we treat as negligible, she knew was indispensable. We have more technology for saving time today than any point in human history. And somehow, we still have less time available for one another. We have astonishing systems for communication, and yet we are registering some of the highest levels of loneliness in human history. In fact, it's probably the defining affliction of the global culture, the global society. Something about this suggests that technological progress can increase our human capacity for production, but it doesn't necessarily help us be more human. Mother Teresa understood the distinction between what is a human person and the work that a human person does. She had an anthropology that started with the dignity of the human person. She had a famous instruction: if you can't feed 100 people, just feed one. That sounds offensive to many of us. Our culture is intoxicated with scale, the notion that I'm ineffective if all I do in effect touches one person or touches one thing. I'm most effective when I'm touching billions at a time. No, modern institutions instinctively push us to ask about metrics, but our Christian charity tells us to look at the Christian person in front of us. That's why her wisdom is so contemporary. She has a lot to teach us. Our society is increasingly myopic. We train people to experience reality through digitized fragments. Even our news cycles. When I was going through journalism school, or these classes in journalism, we were told that the news cycle had a certain duration. Today, it's not even 24 hours. And the news cycle demands constant, immediate, stoked outrage. That's just how the digital world is being fed right now. Social media rewards instant outrage and judgment. And so what that does is it continuously stimulates another desire before the previous desire has even been satisfied. All this produces is human beings who, while we have unprecedented access to information like never before, we're also constantly annoyed and therefore bereft of wisdom. Mother Teresa offered another anthropology. She warned us that the hunger for love, quoting her here, can prove more difficult to satisfy than physical hunger. She encountered people in materially prosperous Western nations in her travels. They had more than enough food, but they suffered from tremendous abandonment and isolation. Sure, economics can measure income, but it doesn't quantify whether somebody has someone else who will sit next to them at a hospital bed. Our medicine can extend life, but it's also unfortunately being weaponized to end life. Politics can distribute benefits, but politics can be the very thing that takes it away from people. And therefore, the deepest poverty within wealthy societies is within the human heart. Mother Teresa told the Nobel audience in 1979 about visiting elderly people whose institution contained beautiful material amenities, but the residents continually watched the door, hoping that their children would visit. She knew that there was a poverty there. Western societies seem to not want to acknowledge that we are a culture of abandonment. That observation should jar us. It should trouble us. By the way, people sat mesmerized listening to this tiny Albanian nun who spoke with a thick accent. Why? She had earned the right to be heard. She was living the very thing she preached. We've become extraordinarily competent at outsourcing our obligations. Previous generations understood that children need to be educated by parents. Elderly parents have to be cared for by the family. Entertainment can occupy everyone separately, but it ought to be in the same house together, and it ought to be in limited quantities so that we can build a family together. Today, we've outsourced all of that. All of it has become individuated. Mother Teresa insisted love begins at home. That sounds sentimental. I understand that. Charity begins at home, love begins at home. I completely understand that. But where she is right here is that there's a hierarchy of loves. The society, political policy, political architecture, none of these things can manufacture the simplest bases for marital fidelity or parental devotion or having children be devoted to parents because parents are pouring love into children consistently. Nope. Civilization depends upon virtues that it cannot purchase. Virtues must be cultivated and painstakingly built. That's why Mother Teresa's insistence upon small acts needs to be paid attention to. She said, "We ourselves feel that what we are doing is just a drop in the ocean, while the ocean would be less because of that missing drop." That's a challenge to our modern assumption. Our action matters, principally when people don't see it, regardless of how many views and likes it gets. Social media has taught us that unless millions view our content, we don't matter. Well, no. That kind of visibility, that kind of cultural validation isn't a validation for the depth of charity of that act. Mother Teresa lived in the reversal of that psychology. The important question to her was whether somebody was loved. That's why her spirituality was so insistent upon Christ. That the love of Christ is what compels you to love the person nearest to you. The human mind can develop enormous compassion for abstract human groups. What do I mean? Oh, are we not afraid or concerned about huge swaths of children and families hungry in particular continents? Of course we are. We can care about abstract problems rather easily. We can also become remarkably ignorant to the suffering of the human being sitting across the dinner table from us and become distant and cut off from them. It's easier to say I am in solidarity with millions. It's harder to say I see your pain as you sit in front of me. Let me share Jesus with you. Let me walk with you to Jesus in this pain. It's actually very fashionable today to announce your concern for humanity or starving animals or war, but we also easily scroll past the lonely person whose phone number is in our contacts. Mother Teresa understood something psychologically profound. Judgment consumes our time. Time that should be spent trying to do acts of real love. I'm not talking about sentiment here, willing the good of the other, real love. And the problem is digital culture has industrialized that to this day. And that's why I think her refusal of reducing the human person is the lesson that you and I ought to understand and embrace today. That for her, regardless of religion, the dying Hindu, Muslim, they were all human persons. But she wanted to share Jesus Christ with them. Let me make this clear. She lived for Christ. She preached Jesus Christ. All of her works of charity were to the effect that she wanted to share Christ, who alone is the final hope of the human person. The unwanted child, the leper, the wealthy, lonely Westerner, these were real persons to her that needed Jesus Christ. And that's why she once warned against the spirit of the world that makes gods out of power, riches, and pleasure, because these material goods are spiritually dangerous and they can become gods that can take us away from the one who is truly God. And so in the face of all this, her hardest teaching, love has to hurt. Love has to hurt for it to be true love. So here's my exhortation to you, my friends. How about we stop worrying about every single global issue in an abstract reality and start paying attention to the hurting within our families and our friendships and start giving them Jesus. Mother Teresa, pray for us. I'm Marcus Peter.